Just give me 1 second. Welcome everybody to 52 Living Ideas. Tonight we'll be covering chapter 7, The Art of War. As always, I would like to request somebody to read any version that they have. We'll do 2 readings and then we'll move to Jason's translations and then we'll take comments on from there. So I see, James, you have your hand up. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, I have the Giles translation, and it's the chapter Maneuvering. Sun Tzu said, in war, the general receives his commands from the sovereign. Having collected the army and concentrated his forces, he must blend and harmonize the different elements thereof before pitching his camp. After that comes tactical maneuvering, than which there is nothing more difficult. The difficulty of tactical maneuvering consists in turning the devious into the direct and misfortune into gain. Thus, to take a long and circuitous route, after enticing the enemy out of the way, and though starting after him to contrive to reach the goal before him, shows knowledge of the artifice of deviation. Maneuvering with an army is advantageous, with an undisciplined multitude, most dangerous.
Thank you, James. Would anyone else like to read their translation? This section 1 of chapter 7. Madeline, thank you, because I have the same thing that James has. So.
Okay, yes, I seem to have an aberrant one, so I think I'm it for a lot of these. I have the Roger Ames translation. Chapter 7, Armed Contest. Master Sun said, the art of using troops is this. In the process of the commander's receiving his orders from the ruler, assembling his armies, mobilizing the population for war, and setting up his camp facing the enemy, there's nothing of comparable difficulty to the armed contest itself. What is difficult in the armed contest is to turn the long and tortuous route into the direct, and to turn adversity into advantage. Thus, making the enemy's road long and tortuous, lure him along it by baiting him with easy gains. Set out after he does, yet arrive before him. This is to understand the tactic of converting the tortuous and the direct. I'm not sure where the Giles version ends. At the end of the next sentence?
One more sentence.
Okay. Armed contests can be both a source of advantage and of danger.
Thank you, Madeline. So with that, we will go to Jason, your translation.
Yeah, you see my screen already. So
I can.
So first, this chapter is a little bit long, so I will save time. Okay, a little bit long, and I think we still can finish today. So from chapter 1 to this point, it's the midpoint. So I think obviously Sun Tzu is not talking to the prince. He's talking to the general. And from the very beginning, the title we will see, I translate as military striving, and I don't like the some other translation called like armed struggling or something because it doesn't sound right. But I really like the version Madeline read called armed contest. So I think right at this moment, if you think about the situation, Sun Tzu is talking about the situation, 2 armies face each other, and then they, before the fighting and the battle haven't started fight yet, but the army already sent out with a certain distance and they face each other. So chapter 7 and chapter 8 all begin at the same sentence. Okay, so here at the beginning, Master Sun said, in the military operation, the general acts under the order of the prince, form the army by assembling the people and confront the enemy from the garrison. There is nothing more difficult than military striving. I think the first three verses will be repeat in the next chapter, because I think this is important, because kind of have a job description for the general. So we talk about in the military operation, the general acts under the order from the prince. I think that's important, because the prince or the lord, okay, sovereignty decide that's the war, you need to go. Okay, act under that. Remember, just under the prince, the order to go, but not all the detail. Okay, I think Sun Tzu will talk about this one. And they form the army by assembling the people. The Chinese word use 众 here. So I need to translate as people. That probably means not only the professional soldier, also include the draft people, okay, common people. The difficulty of military striving is that the indirect approach can be direct. The dangers can be advantageous. Thus, taking an indirect approach enticing them with seeming profit and start after them, but arriving before them. This is called knowing the artifice of direct and indirect approach. I like a little bit focus on this word, starting after them, but arriving before them. I think that's very important in the military, also in the, I think, all the Asian martial art. Okay, if you're familiar with martial art, Tai Chi or Taekwondo, all this one, before you start, you set a pose, right? And with your opponent, you try to perfect 100% protect yourself. But once you move, you have some weakness exposed. So that's the time the opponent will attack you. But if you don't move, then you will never attacked. So that's the critical point. So I think that become a very famous saying about the starting after the enemy, but arrive before that. So I think how to do it, I think that's you need to decide, but that's the principle. So finally, Sun Tzu said, therefore, military striving can be advantageous. Military striving can also be dangerous. So I think he just described this scene, and it's a crucial moment when two armies face each other, and then that's the crucial moment. So thank you, and Aman, please.
Thank you, and thank you, Madeline, for reading, because I didn't want to. I'm trying to save my voice, like I said. However, having said that, Jason was touching on something that seems a little oblique, I think, in the original, but is clear if you've engaged in some sort of combat sport of any kind or combat activity. This idea of jockeying for position, luring your opponent in through deceit, and then cutting off their plans by interrupting them. These are some of the instrumental tactics for being successful in any combat sport. And while he was discussing it, I pulled this off of my shelf. because this is the rather infamous Tao of Jeet Kune Do by Bruce Lee. The title itself means way of the intercepting fist. His great claim to fame was to be able to complete or execute what's called a stop hit, which is to punch someone while they are attempting to punch you. In other words, you have to be very quick to do this, but it really is a just pithy example of what Sun Tzu is discussing here. Start after the enemy and arrive before them. There are many ways to do this, but a lot of it has to do with the effort and making the effort seem effortless is the subterfuge. The idea that the other army, you can convince them to maybe take a more leisurely pace because they look at you as if you're in disarray, or they see that you're at a disadvantageous position. And so they think, oh, we don't have to double step it. And then maybe you hard march through the night unexpectedly, but in doing so, you arrive before them. You put in the effort to give yourself the advantage, and you misdirect your opponent in the process. That's the takeaway from this chapter.
Thank you, Ahmad. Now, if anyone else has any other comments for this passage, feel free and raise your hand or type exclamation point in the chat. First up, we have Ian.
Hello, I have a question regarding the second verse. Because there's a website I found that mentions it's about peace in your own state or in your own country first. I think it points out to the Chinese word he. The exact phrase would be jiao he she. So, and he means peace or harmony in Chinese. So yeah, I just wanted to ask Jason if that would be a correct interpretation of it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I specifically pay attention on this one. Okay, I don't think this one here, he means peace. At least I don't see this way. I see means end. Okay, I think you know some Chinese. Okay, they also means end or together. And importantly, the first word, jiao, means interact. So if you put the interact and the other words together, I think the best way is face each other. That's my interpretation. And then I hope you take it. Okay. If you disagree or you have some other thing, I'm very happy to know. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll just paste the website here. They have like side notes, and yeah, that's why I was like a bit.
Yeah, please. I'd like to know. Yeah,
thank you.
Please. So the side note said he means peace.
Yeah, it's quite long. Do you want me to read the whole thing?
Oh, you can send the text to me or put in the chat. That'll be fine. So yeah. But at least I don't see they have the meaning of peace at this moment, at this sentence. So
yeah, I'll just send it in the chat. Thank you.
Thank you, Ian. James.
Sorry. Yeah, I liked it's the first one is not that interesting, I guess. We didn't get a copy of your translation yet, Jason, letting you know if you planned on posting it. The other I don't like the term striving because it sounds very unintelligent in English. It doesn't seem to the Google translation of the title is military struggle. I don't know if you considered that. That sounds a little bit more reasonable. Military striving sounds like strife. It's just the idea that there's going to be contest between two people. The struggle implies something, but I really like the word maneuvering because it means movement. So that's why I think Lionel Giles chose that title because it implies the movements which I think is a theme, one of the themes in the chapter. And also being in a certain place before your opponent can get there, things like that. That's maneuvering. So I thought it would be apt to use that title. So that's just my comment on the title. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd like to respond. Thank you, James. Yeah. I like maneuvering, but only thing I don't use because I cannot connect this word with the Chinese word 争. Okay, so that's the problem. Sometimes I have better, I know that some words are much better, but I try to connect with the original Chinese word. Okay, so I think the maneuvering probably too far away from 争. What somebody don't know better probably can let me know. Because English is my second language, so I may not get it right. So it's interesting to your comment about you said striving sounds unintelligent and you like struggling better. But it could be my problem or personal taste, I don't know. I feel struggling is more unintelligent. Okay, striving is more like I'm putting effort to do something. Okay, struggling sounds like I'm drowning and I try to survive. Okay, I'm not sure my understanding correct or not, but after heard the Madeline's reading, I think the context may be a good way. But I use striving is because in the Dao De Jing translation, they use a lot of striving for the world. Okay, because 争天下, they are compete. And at that time, I think we also had a discussion. I call it competing. Okay, compete for something. But for some reason, most people seems not like it. Okay, so that's the story here. And then I'm very happy to anybody give me suggestion. And then I will definitely will think about it. And then thank you.
I have a couple of questions myself, but I'll hold off for now.
But yeah, I think my point was just that it goes a little bit against Sun Tzu's philosophy. I see his philosophy as one of always taking the advantage. So in other words, so that striving is not taking the advantage, striving is just accepting one's fate.
Yeah, I do think we need to at least come back to in some way, shape, or form the idea of good positioning as well as timing. If you're talking about beating your opponent to some particular area, there's also, I found very interesting in your translation, Jason, is enticing them with seeming profit. That's also deception that plays a role within that, and we've covered that quite a bit as well. So if anybody else wishes to comment on that, but there's a lot of relationships obviously with some prior chapters. Madeline.
Yeah, well, I like striving. It does carry the connotation of strife. Like the end of the Matthew Arnold poem. And in English, it also has some class connotations, which is that you don't want to be seen to be striving in terms of your career or your social life, to be seen as a social climber. I think in the military context, it makes a lot of sense because it is about the word strife. I agree with Jason that struggle, it can sound a little bit like a barroom brawl or you know, your papers are disorganized and you're struggling with them. So I like striving.
Thank you, Madeline. Allison, you're up next.
Yeah, I agree with Madeline. Struggling is more like there's a roadblock in your way, and it's like you've got to overcome this thing, so you're struggling with it. But striving is more like you're trying to move, you know, like up the classes, or you're trying to improve yourself in some way. But it doesn't necessarily mean that there's a big, you know, thing in your way that you're overcoming. It's like you're just trying to improve yourself. Yeah.
I mean, this is interesting. I mean, striving is essentially it's making an effort, right? It's working towards something where you're focused and you know where you're going. Struggling to me is just it's a little bit. They're close, but I think that struggling to me is you're kind of fighting against yourself, not necessarily an enemy. And I think that there's a distinction made with those two. If when I hear the word struggle, I start to think that your forces are struggling. And if your forces are struggling, they're not, you know, necessarily going to beat somebody to the right place, or they're not necessarily going to be executing. So striving to me seems more appropriate because it's something that is focused with intense effort. So that's the distinction that I would make. So if anybody has any thoughts on that, please feel free. Quan.
I think that to strive here is very interesting because it has a connotation of to make your best to achieve something. Okay, and it's not a surprise that there's this discussion now about to strive or to achieve, to fight, to struggle, to combat, to fight, etc. Because we are at the first chapter of the third part of the Sun Tzu. Because let's not forget that from 1, 2, 3 is more the general universal principles, and 4, 5, 6 is about the kairos, precisely what James said, that the Sun Tzu philosophy is to find the advantage point or the advantageous position, but it's more something happening in the mind of the rulers and of the commander-in-chief. But now at 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 13, meaning the last 7 chapters, it's much more about the work of the officers and of the men on the ground. So the idea that you have to strive for, that you have to make a physical effort in order to make into reality, into space-time reality, what has been found in the mind of the rulers and of the commander-in-chiefs in 1, 2, 3, and 4, 5, 6, I think it's reflect that the fact that we are on the third part of the books, meaning the first part being Tempus, the second Kairos, Tempus 1, 2, 3, Kairos chapters 4, 5, 6, and the Chronos part are about the last 7 chapters, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. I stop here.
Thank you, Juan. Let's hand it off to Aman, and then I'll hand it off to Shrikant.
I just wanted to say very quickly, so the copy I'm working from, the Samuel Griffith, is one of the texts I refer to when I'm going back and forth with Jason about this. He titles this Maneuvering, which I don't know how well you can see, but he puts a footnote right at it. And that footnote reads, literally, struggle or contest of armies, as each strives to gain an advantageous position. Having read that in conjunction with the actual translation of Zhang, it felt apropos. It felt like a faithful translation. It may not feel as satisfying as a term that carries with it sort of militaristic connotations, but it's accurate to what Sun Tzu was actually writing in the text.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, for filling in. And sorry about I had to step away unexpectedly. Jason, are we trying to finish the entire chapter today, or how much of the chapter are we trying to
I think we can finish. We can finish. Yeah.
We can finish today.
It's,
Okay.
It's long, but
okay, let's do that. Okay, so then let's proceed to the next one. Who would like to read? James, would you like to read?
Sure. Here we are. If you set a fully equipped army in march in order to snatch an advantage, the chances are that you will be too late. On the other hand, to detach a flying column for the purpose involves the sacrifice of its baggage and stores. Thus, if you order your men to roll up their buff coats and make forced marches without halting day or night, covering double the usual distance at a stretch, doing 100 li in order to wrest an advantage, the leaders of all your 3 divisions will fall into the hands of the enemy. The stronger men will be in front. The jaded ones will fall behind. And on this plan, only 1/10 of your army will reach its destination. If you march 50 li in order to outmaneuver the enemy, you will lose the leader of your 1st division, and only half your forces will reach the goal. If you march 30 li with the same object, 2/3 of your army will arrive. We may take it, then, that an army without its baggage train is lost. Without provisions, it is lost. Without basis of supply, it is lost. We cannot enter into alliances until we are acquainted with the designs of our neighbors. We are not fit to lead an army on the march unless we are familiar with the face of the country, its mountains and forests, its pitfalls and precipices, its marshes and swamps. We shall be unable to turn natural advantage to account unless we make use of local guides.
Thank you. Thank you, James. Amon, would you like to read your translation?
Actually, if Madeline wanted to read hers again,
wonderful.
I'd be grateful of the favor of saving my voice.
Please do. We want to reserve Amon's
No,
voice.
that's fine. That's fine. Go ahead, Amon.
No, Madeline, please go ahead. Amon needs to rest his voice. So if you could read it, I would really appreciate it.
Yeah, he has a page up to use his voice.
Madeline, please go ahead.
She might be busy. I can read. Okay. I'm just going to sound bad, so bear with me. Chapter 2. One who sets the entire army in motion to chase an advantage will not attain it. If he abandons the camp to contend for advantage, the stores will be lost. If it follows that when one rolls up the armoire and sets out speedily, stopping neither day nor night, and marching at double time for 100 li, the 3 commanders will be captured. For the vigorous troops will arrive first, and the feeble straggle along behind, so that if this method is used, only 1/10 of the army will arrive. In a forced march of 50 li, the commander of the van will fall, and using this method, but half the army will arrive. In a forced march of 30 li, but 2/3 will arrive. Sorry, I'm going to see where I'm going. It follows that an army which lacks heavy equipment, fodder, food, and stores will be lost. Thus, those who do not know the conditions of mountains and forest, hazardous defiles, marshes, and swamps cannot conduct the march of an army. Those who do not use local guides are unable to obtain the advantage of the ground.
Thank you, Amon. And I'm sorry to say that you, with your cold, is not as as sonorous as Madeline, but still, thank you. Really appreciate your reading. Thank you, Jason.
Okay, so since going, I think here you will find out it's compared to the previous section, Sun Tzu is going to very, very detailed at this moment. So, okay, so you probably will start to see the translation. I start to break down to 1, 2, 3, 4, and ABC. 2 reasons. One is I think Sun Tzu is different than other early Chinese writer. His writing is more organized, okay? And so I would like to put in an organized way. And second thing is easier for me to translate, okay? I try to match line by line, so that will be easier for me. So for these 2 reasons, and I will keep the, I will reformat Sun Tzu's text, okay? So that will looks clear. And sometimes you may, because you organize it a different way, you may see in a different meaning. So if you see its meaning has been changed, or then please let me know, because I don't want the unintentionally change the message of the original text. So, the second paragraph, if you send an army with full equipment to strive for advantage, you may not reach the destination. If you send an army without equipment to strive for advantage, you may sacrifice equipment. For this reason, you might send an army with light equipment and make forced marches day and night without resting in order to double the usual distances. I think here Sun Tzu put 3 different situations. Okay, so I think his logic is clear, right? He talked about when you want to reach some place, if you go with full equipment, you may not be able to reach it because too heavy equipment. But if you go without the equipment, then you lost your equipment. So you may decide you make the forced marches and then day and the night, and you with light equipment, so you can reach it. Okay, reach the destination. So you put the 3 different situations. And how about march 100 miles? I think the original words is Li, and then that's the Chinese unit. But I think possibly we can use miles, same, not much difference. Or how about 100 miles? How about 50 miles? How about 30 miles? I think it's a very logical way to consider, right? So if your army marches 100 miles to strive for advantage, the leaders of 3 divisions of the army will be captured by the enemy. The stronger soldiers will arrive early and the weaker will arrive late. Only 1/10 of the army can reach the destination in this way. Second situation, if your army marches 50 miles to strive for advantage, you will lose the leader of the front division. Only half of the army can reach the destination in this way. Number 3, if your army marches 30 miles to strive for advantage, 2/3 of the army will reach the destination. So that's Sun Tzu give you a few situations to think about it. I don't see he give you any suggestion, but basically that's the remember on the chapter 1, he says that you need to do calculation. Chinese words 算. You need to not only plan, you need to calculate. Okay, so that's he's talking about. Thus, the army without equipment will perish. The army without provisions will perish. The army without storage, supply will perish. So that's, he used the word Wang. Okay, so in this situation, Wang means dead, which means perish. Okay, number 4. Thus, we don't form alliance with feudal lords unless we know their intentions. We cannot send our armies unless we know the configuration of mountain, forest, precipices, okay, barriers, swamps, and lakes. We cannot have the advantageous location unless we employ local guides. So I think the last one, the message is obvious. So Aman, please.
Yeah, thank you. I like this chapter. I like your translation of this chapter. Though I didn't make the suggestion to retain Li, I do understand why you put in miles, but they are not going to be a one-to-one. Actually, Li is about half a kilometer. So if you want to do the mental calculations, when he says 30 Li, he's talking about 15 kilometers, which doesn't make it as far. He's saying even in that short a distance, if you are doing a hard march, you know, you may wind up only retaining 2/3 of your army. 1/3 of them will perish and fall off. And this is important because these are conscripted armies. These are not, you know, huge professional armies. That was the new thing of warfare in Sun Tzu's time. You were conscripting the whole swaths of, you know, your kingdom to throw into some pot brewed iron armor, give them a standard halberd, get them out there and make them march. So what he's talking about here is when you're using what could look like a vast resource of many, many, many people, how you use them matters. And you're going to have to make these trade-offs very purposefully, knowing you will lose what looks like a great army starting in the square of your village, and then you'll send them off to war. That's not what shows up on the battlefield. And that's a reality that the prince and the general need to appreciate before making these kind of decisions. I also want to draw attention just briefly to that last line about local guides. This is kind of the first inkling we get about employing saboteurs, employing traitors within another kingdom. And he'll have a lot more to say about how much expense you should actually, what am I trying to say, budget for employing these people because of how valuable they actually are to what you're trying to achieve.
Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Folks, I would love your comments on this section. Again, keep the comments to the text itself. We will have general comments at the end when we finish the entire section. I'm going to start with Joe, followed by James. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is actually very much related to, you know, how we expend our resources, and that we are very calculated. I think that's maybe Mon had mentioned that already, in how much equipment that we need in order to remain flexible and moving at a proper rate. There is there is a limited amount of resources. And if you think about it in past chapters, we've talked about how also position is actually much more important than maybe even the number of troops or even the tools troops have. So I also think that if you're able to move quickly, and then you're also flexible, and I think that you can, and I think it's in line with a lot of the other thinking. that we're talking about. So.
Thanks, Joe. Next up is James.
Thank you. This is the first chapter that I read where actually the business cases are popping up into my head. I'd heard that this book was supposed to be good for businessmen to understand business planning, and this is the first chapter where it's more. It seems like it's as much aimed towards business as it is militarily. The first in the first section, there's the turning the devious into the direct, misfortune into gain, to take a long take a long route instead of kind of enticing the enemy out of the way, starting after him to reach the goal before him, as a kind of in order to use a direct, what the artifice of direct and indirect approaches, or deviation, in other words. And then in and then the second one, in this one, we have the you could have where he talks about losing, only having losing a tenth of your or losing most of your army. It's like your product tier. If you have a tier of your product line vulnerable to the competition, despite the overall excellence of your product line and fair pricing and so forth, the competition can raid that particular market segment and knock out the particular product that could be one of your flagships. Another example is when the idea of the enemy. The other thing that occurred to me here is the idea of guerrilla tactics, because obviously if you're going to lose men because of your kind of like unthoughtful approach to raiding, your forced marches and so forth, then that's sort of like guerrilla tactics, and if they're picking off your men. And this reminds me of a lot of modern warfare. In the Vietnam War, there was a certain disadvantage to the American style of fighting because of the fact that the Viet Cong style was 100% guerrilla. They were all, as a matter of fact, they were almost completely underground. They were always missing at the point when you wanted to attack them. They wouldn't be present. They wouldn't be present to the air attacks, and they wouldn't be easy to find for the patrols either.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks.
So this is great. I think there's a great section for that reason.
Thank you, James. Next up is Joe.
I'll just make it just to build on the whole business idea. That just think about it. If you have these vast resources and these extra resources, that many times, and we talked about this in the chapter of timing, that it's more important to get where you're going quickly, as opposed to necessarily having the extra resources and not getting to where you're going at the right time. And why that's important is that in business, or pretty much any other situation, timing is one of the most important things. Is that the timing of product gets to the market. It often depends whether if it's too early or if it's too late. Depends on whether or not it can be, it'll be accepted. So I think that why the proper amount of investment and better is the enemy of good kind of concept kind of comes into play a bit when I think of if you're applying this to some type of business situation.
Thank you, Joe. All right, let's proceed. There is many things. I think Jason had something.
Yeah, I think great James talk about business, because I think I don't know about today, you know, I'm not in business for a while. And before in my time, every presentation start with SWOT, right? SWOT, strengths, weakness, opportunity, and the threats. Okay, I don't know about now. Okay, every presentation start with this, and then I think when I read the first paragraph, talking about the most difficult when you face each other, and then military striving could be advantageous, it could be dangerous. I think that's the situation, the SWOT situation I used to hear every day. So yeah, thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, Jason. Let's continue with our reading. Folks, if there is anybody else who can read the Samuel Griffith translation, please go ahead.
Uh-oh, Shirkan, you froze.
Yep. Oh, sorry. Can you hear me now?
Actually, it was Amon that froze.
Amon froze.
Yeah, unfortunately, it wasn't you,
it's
Shirkan. I mean, no, it's not unfortunate that you didn't freeze, but yeah, it was Amon that froze.
All right. Okay, Amon, you're back. It was you who had frozen. It was relative freezing. That's how Zoom works. All right. Let's go to the next second. Okay, Alison can read, but let's start with Alison. You can read the Samuel Griffith translation. Alison, you need to unmute though.
Yeah, sorry, I wasn't raising my hand to read. I was raising it because I wanted to make a comment about maneuvering. This unfortunately also applies not just in military and business, but it applies in schools nowadays during lockdowns. I was in a lockdown today because there was a shooting right outside my school today. And so this is something that as teachers, we think about all the time, because you have to think about, is it safer to keep your kids in the classroom? Is it safer to evacuate the kids? You have to do split-second things of, if the person is in the building, where are they in the building? And can you get your kids to an exit safely? And, you know, there's so many things about it that unfortunately, it's not just about, you know, it's in the news every single day. And, you know, and it's something I've lived with just today. So just wanted to, you know, highlight that it's very much maneuvering can be any situation, many different situations, unfortunately. Yeah.
Alison, I'm really sorry to hear that. And, you know. Yeah,
it was during the state's standardized testing today, right in the middle of it. It was unreal. So, yeah.
All right.
We're all okay, though. Thank goodness.
I'm glad everybody's okay. Thank you. Thank you, Alison. Next, we're going to have James. Would you like to read the next section?
Thank you. Okay. In war, practice dissimulation, and you will succeed. Move only if there is a real advantage to be gained. Whether to concentrate or to divide your troops must be decided by circumstances. Let your rapidity be that of the wind, your compactness that of the forest. In raiding and plundering, be like fire. In immobility, like a mountain. Let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. When you plunder a countryside, let the spoil be divided amongst your men. When you capture new territory, cut it up into allotments for the benefit of the soldiery. Ponder and deliberate before you make a move. He will conquer who has learnt the artifice of deviation. Such is the art of maneuvering.
Thank you. James, was that the Samuel Griffith version or the other version?
No, unfortunately, that was written by Lionel Giles.
Do you happen to have the Samuel Griffith version with you?
I do not, but Madeline does.
Okay. I don't know if Madeline is available, But if not, then we will go to Amon. I'm sorry.
No apologies. I came here of my own free will. Y'all just have to put up with my Barry White impression. This is chapter 3. Now, war is based on deception. Move when it is advantageous and create changes in the situation by dispersal and concentration of forces. When campaigning, be swift as the wind. In leisurely march, majestic as the forest. In raiding and plundering, like fire. In standing, firm as the mountains. As unfathomable as the clouds. Move like a thunderbolt. When you plunder the countryside, divide your forces. When you conquer territory, divide the profits. Weigh the situation, then move. He who knows the art of direct and the indirect approach will be victorious. Such is the art of maneuvering.
Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Jason.
Okay, so I think at the beginning I talked about Sun Tzu. This one is immoral. Okay, so right now, gradually, because we close to the face-to-face, a little bit immoral. Okay, let's put it this way. So the translation, I start to use the word pretense. We start to cheat each other. Okay, so that's and actually Sun Tzu's word change. Okay, from beginning is 鬼, I translate as craftiness, and here he called 诈. Okay, that means cheating, pretense. Okay, so I think when you go to face fighting, it's bloody. Okay, so that's the word start to change. I like to catch this change. Okay. Military success is based on pretense. Movement is based on advantages. Changes are based on division and combination. Okay. So the next is, I think this is a very good description, and I try my best to catch the meaning and the format of the Chinese text. In Chinese text here, I hope you see the middle words always the same. Okay, this one called 如, that means like. Okay, so basically the first is a verb, and this verb, this movement, like something, like wood, like a gust, like a forest, like a fire, like a mountain, like a cloud, like thundering. Okay, so that's Sun Tzu is describing the army should move in this fashion. Okay, so thus the army should be swift like a gust, gentle like a forest, red like fire, immovable like a mountain, unknowable like a black cloud, act like a thunderbolt. So after plundering a village, divide the provision for soldiers. After capture new territory, divide it to defend. Before making a move, judge deliberately. Okay. Those who knows the artifice of direct and indirect approaches ahead can win. This is the method of military striving. Okay, so here, I think Giles translation, another translation, 扩地分手. Okay, it doesn't mean the first phrase talking about you plundering a village, you divide the provision for soldier. I think that's right. And second part talk about if you capture the new land, new territory, you divide, it's not divided for your soldier, it's divided, to defend. The word "so" means defend. So it divided to defend, not like divided to give to other soldier. I think it's the meaning. It doesn't make sense and also not correct, in my opinion. Yeah, Aman, please.
Thank you, Jason. This chapter makes me think of a conversation we had a couple of weeks back about the metaphor in classic Chinese. And Sun Tzu is ham-fisted with his metaphors. He's unabashed. This like this like this. It's as unmistakable as it could possibly be, but that is by design. And he's not given to using metaphors often within the art of war, but when he does, he's using it for very specific and I'd say pedagogical purposes. When you say swift like a gust, you are telling them, don't be, this has to be all at once. It needs to be everything given. There can't be any hesitation. When you say, raid like fire, I think we can all picture how fire crackles over a dry landscape, especially if you were anywhere near California in the last 5 years. All of these are very poignant metaphors, but they're metaphors meant to be unmistakable so that the recipient can take that image. It's a mnemonic device. You hold that image, you take it to your troops in training, you train in that fashion. And I think that it's a brilliant use of sprinkling just a little metaphor on top to make it pack the punch you want it to make when you're trying to use this as an instruction manual.
Wonderful. That's great observation. I was like, if you're going to tell people be immovable, as opposed to saying be like mountain, I think that carries this immediacy, and you know exactly what is meant. Be like the wind, be like the fire, be like the forest. Compact, be compact, but be like a forest. I mean, immediately everybody gets it. So it's just very, very powerful. Thank you. All right, folks, comments on this section, go ahead and can type exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. I'm going to start with James. Again, we'll keep to just mostly the text so that we can go through the whole text, and then we'll go to any kind of general comments. Go ahead, James.
Yeah, these are I would call these natural models. In the translation, Jason was very careful to use the word like, which means that these are similes, and not in the original, they're not metaphors, they're similes. And these are natural. He's making each of these as a natural model. So the wind, the forest, the fire, the mountain, and what do these mean, in terms of warfare, and and the thunderbolt, right? So I think so. This is a tremendous amount of clarity using the natural, using the idea of modeling action after nature, and so it's kind of that's the I think that's why this one is particularly powerful. And thank you for Jason for pointing that out.
Thanks, James. Next up is going to be Ian, Joe, and Kwan. Ian, go ahead.
So yeah, I'm just a bit confused about the compactness part. Like, what is that in terms of actually doing that? Because the Chinese word is shu, which is slow or calm or gentle, but isn't that like the opposite of what war is like? So can elaborate on that. Thank you so much.
Yeah, let me respond this one. I'm glad that you asked this question because I also want to talk about this word Yeah, I'm very happy you mentioned this one. Okay, so that's exactly I want to talk. And this word that you are talking about, I hope everybody can see it. Let's see. Xu Ru Lin, right? That's the word that you are talking about. I translate as gentle. Okay, so I'm not sure what's the right word. Okay, compact is not the right word. Okay, slow. Okay, could be the word. I think it could mean slow. A little bit something. The meaning of this. So. I think the picture, at least the picture I have is you think about the forest, right? When the wind blows, the forest is moving, but just a little bit, right? Not too much. I think that's the image Sun Tzu is talking about. And then, of course, I would be very happy if anybody can give me a better word. I call it gentle like a forest. But I'm not sure in American, when we read English, we probably don't connect forest with the word gentle. Okay, mountain you say immovable. I think everybody can picture it, but it's probably difficult for the American reader or English reader to see a forest as gentle. Okay, so I definitely welcome any kind of suggestion about this word because it's a hard word. Okay. So thank you to raise this question, and that's exactly I want to talk about, for this translation.
Thank you, Jason. I just wanted to add, so I pasted the text from that website. So it's something about formations. Somehow, I don't know if anyone can comment on that. I put something on the chat.
Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Amon, do you have a comment on this particular word?
Actually, I
it as compact, like the first translation that James used called it compact. What did your Griffith translation say?
Shu can be translated as gentle. It absolutely fits that meaning. I'm going to put the etymology here into the text, the chat box real quick. I was actually just working on that, but the components of it are kind of interesting. So the word is comprised from two separate words, to step and to have surplus. And so I like the idea of gentle like a forest. It gives an indication when an army is at rest, it needs to be in quietude. It needs to be quintessence. It needs to be refurbishing itself, regrowing itself, because it has a chance to take advantages of its surpluses. I think that it actually is an apt way of translating and understanding the instruction Sun Tzu's giving, is that you need to march hard, you need to rest hard, you need to actually take advantage of your downtime. Any soldier anywhere on the planet at any time has said downtime is to be taken advantage of, because battle is hours upon hours of boredom with moments of mind-numbing terror scattered throughout. So when you're bored, instead of simply languishing and kvetching and letting your troops' morale degrade, and you get them into a state where they grow, they flourish, they actually restock and resupply themselves. So I do think Shu was well translated as gentle, and it is considered a very normal standard way of translating that word.
Excellent. Thank you. Thank you, Amon. Next up is going to be Joe, Quan, and James. Joe.
Yeah, I mean, basically, I just have a question about the third part of Jason's translation, where the dividing the provisions for the soldiers after capturing new territory, divided to defend. And I'm looking for it, but I thought there was another section where they talked about not necessarily conquering, basically integrating with the population and not necessarily destroying the population, like making sure. But this sounds like a little bit to me that there is almost an occupying force that is governing, whatever they've conquered, and it just seems different from what I read in the past.
Yeah. Let me respond to this one. I think this one I forget. I cannot. I don't. I think the previous section. I don't remember 3 or 4. Talking about you should, when the enemy surrender, you should bring them mixed together. And I don't see they talk about and then the chariot when you captured, right? You should change the flag and put together. And here is talking about provision. I'm not sure the translation should be provision basics is whatever you loot, okay, in the village, okay, and you should spread, okay, share with the people, okay. I think that's what they meant. And you may not consistent because right now it's a different situation, right? Before we are in the table, gentlemen, we are talking about we should be nice to the people in the enemy's land, okay? But in the real fighting, you are not gentlemen anymore. Gradually, you become how should I call it? Beast, close
soldier.
Soldier. Okay, I don't know what the right term, because you become more practical. Let's put it this way. Sometimes you cannot be that. Remember one part, he also talked about, is that on this section, probably next section, talking about too much love also is a problem, okay? You cannot too much love, okay? That's also the problem, okay? And I think we will face this one. So you will see, I think, Joe, you are right. You will see it's not consistent. That's why I almost on the very first day, I'm talking about the audience change. Otherwise, you will see they are not consistent. When you read 道德经 or Analects, they all consistent. They are talking to the scholar, 道德经, the Lao Tzu talking about whoever, okay, the prince or whoever, they're consistent. But this one cannot be consistent because the audience change. When you talk to the prince, talk to the general, talk to the soldier, you are not talking to the soldier, be nice, follow the Tao, you will say kill them. Okay, so I think that's the situation. Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks, Jason. Thanks, Joe. Next up is Kwan, followed by James. Kwan.
Okay, I would like to come back to the word Tzu, and I think that the first translation is right. It means gentle or slow, but I think that we have to see here 3 pairs, okay? First, let your rapidity be that of the wind and your compactness that of the forest. So you have to be rapid yet imposing, okay? And the next sentence is raiding and plundering like fire, but is immovability like a mountain. So it's like fire, but at the same time stable like a mountain. And the last, let your plans be dark and impenetrable as night, and when you move, fall like a thunderbolt. So you have night and light. So you have 3 series of opposition. So this, yes, that, yet that, this, yet that, and this, yet that. So the army has to be fast like the wind, but at the same time, the army has to be imposing, stable, compact, like a forest, okay? And if you look at a forest in front, well, it gives an impression of majesty, of compactness, of stability. So I think that, paradoxically, you have to be this, but at the same time, the opposite. So it's, you have to be both at the same time. So you have 3, almost 对联, okay? 对联 in Chinese, it's parallel sentences. So you have 3 successive conceptual opposition, but at the same time, not paradoxical in real action, because you can be at the same time fast as the wind, but majestic or stable like the forest. And here I would like to come back to something more fundamental. And I know that it's my obsession, because I see everything in classical Chinese stuff as tempus, kairos, and chronos, okay? And it speaks to the different degrees of epistemological development. And once again, in a fair society, the people at certain epistemological development will have certain level of responsibilities. So once again, chapter 1, 2, 3 were at the level of tempus, is for the sovereign, is for the princes. And chapter 4, 5, 6 were at the level of kairos, for the commander-in-chief. And the last 7 chapters are for the officers and the men on the ground. And what is interesting precisely is that in the first 6 chapters, you would have more complex and more sophisticated metaphors, okay? A little bit what Jason suggested last time, or maybe 2, 3 weeks before, the metaphor for sushu, the eggs and the pebbles. And those 2 metaphors have many layers of interpretations. And you expect people at the level of the aristocratic man and of the democratic man to be capable to understand the metaphor at different levels. But here, from chapter 7 to the end, chapter 13, it's more for the people working on the ground, okay, the officers and the men on the ground. And Sun Tzu is using a very simple simile, okay? As James noticed very rightly, they are not metaphors, they are simile. So the language is more direct, because the language has to be understood by people on the ground and not the commander-in-chief or the prince. And I stop here.
Excellent, excellent points, Quan. I particularly like the pairing, because I think
thank you for the pairing. You know, yeah, I didn't catch it, you know, until today. Yes, that's a 3 pair. Thank you.
Yeah, and it fits beautifully into the Jason's translation of it, because it captures that, and it also points to the value of similes or metaphors. Because, you know, it's like they may not have difficulty understanding that translation of this, but they know what forest is. So that it gives something like an external context for you to understand something internal. All right. Next up is going to be James.
Okay. I'm just also commenting on the bon mot for this particular word, which doesn't seem to be quite right, gentleness. And for a military discourse. And so what I would say is that when we think about a forest, I think about the trees, right? The objects that just are, you're thinking about the trees, you're thinking about the density of the forest. And instead of the word compact, you could use the word concentrate or concentration, because the trees and the soldiers are concentrated in a certain form. And that expresses the power of the soldiery. And maybe that's the power of the forest too, because the forest is actually a shield of a kind against the wind. It's a shield for all of the plant life and animals that live underneath the canopy of the trees. So there's a concentration or a density of the forest that is the particular power of the forest. So maybe it's the concentration or the density of the mass of soldiers that really matters when we're making this simile to the forest.
Jason.
Yeah, since this one talk about the simile, and then from Taiwan, every man have to be in military training. So we also use the same simile for the individual soldiers. Okay, in the training cadet, it talk about like walk like a wind, stand like a pine tree, sit like a bell, sleep like ball. Okay, so like ball, when you have something, you have to jump up. Okay, so that's the same simile, you know, when I am in the military, that has been taught.
Wonderful. All right, so let's continue with our reading. Joe, would you like to do the honors by reading the next section?
Sure. Number 4, right? The Book of Army Management says, on the field of battle, the spoken word does not carry far enough, hence the institution of gongs and drums, nor can carry ordinary objects be seen clearly enough, hence the institution of banners and flags. Gongs and drums, banners and flags are means whereby the ears and eyes of the host may be focused on one particular point. The host, thus forming a single united body, it is impossible either for the brave to advance alone or for the cowardly to retreat alone. This is the heart of handling large masses of men. In night fighting, then, make much use of signal fires and drums, and in fighting by day of flags and banners, and as a means of influencing the ears and eyes of your army.
Thank you. Amon?
Sorry, I'm multitasking, taking notes, having conversations. Chapter 4. The Book of Military Administration says, as the voice cannot be heard in battle, drums and bells are used. As troops cannot see each other clearly in battle, flags and banners are used. Now gongs and drums, banners and flags are used to focus the attention of the troops. When the troops can be thus united, the brave cannot advance alone, nor can the cowardly withdraw. This is the art of employing a host. In night fighting, many torches and drums. In day fighting, many banners and flags, in order to influence the sight and hearing of our troops.
Thank you. Jason.
Okay, I think this one is easy, okay, in general. Okay, so the Book of Military Management. We don't know what's the book, okay, but that's a tradition when all ancient Chinese, probably all Chinese, or like to quote some book. So I think that's, so I really don't know this book, but anyway, Sun Tzu called this book. The Book of Military Management says, in the battlefield, people cannot hear each other. Hence, gongs and drums are used. People cannot see each other. Hence, banners and flags are used. Gongs, drums, banners, flags are used as the ears and eyes of one man, means the leader. All people become one. The brave won't advance alone. The cowardly won't retreat alone. This is the method of managing the crowd. Therefore, signal fire and the drum are often used in night fighting. Banner and the flags are often used in day fighting. It is to adjust to people's hearing and sight. I think here I'm interested is called, this is the method of managing the crowd. Because I will compare this one to Lecis in Plato's dialogue, right? Talk about bravery. Forget the name, Lecis and Nicias, right? Nicias. Both are the general in the Athenian generals. But what they are talking about is bravery, the skill of sword fighting. And here, you will see roughly the same time, Chinese military is talking about different concept. It's talking about managing the crowd. They don't put the bravery or brave or cowardly so focus so much. So I think previous section talk about the shi. You create the right shi, then people will be brave. Here again, talking about if you have a right message, okay, the message is on one. So people will move together. So they don't care that much about the individual is brave or cowardly, right? So I think that's the different interest comparison. Thank you. Aman, please.
Practice, practice, practice. Practice makes permanent. And that's really what this is about. The idea of signaling and communications is about making visual things that in the tumult of battle, people will not necessarily instinctively or clearly remember. And I think that's why it says the brave won't advance alone, the cowardly will not retreat, because virtue or vice, it doesn't work unless the whole unit actually operates together. So, and this goes to sort of the business metaphor or any enterprise. If you don't have clear indications of what means what signals to follow, what chains of command to communicate along, what things are paramount and what things are not, the whole operation just kind of disintegrates. And I think Sun Tzu is reinforcing that with the trappings of the military operation, the flags, the bells, the gongs, the torches, but it's applicable to anything that relies on large organization, all pulling in the same direction.
Thank you, Amon. Welcome, David. You're next.
Yeah, I think an interesting point of this, working with Amon, is saying that you have to be fluid. And when you're in the position that the heroes are actually beginning to break through, you have to detect this is the moment to give the signal for everyone. And if you're unified, the leadership responds to the heroic and can use it for the group, which the group can't see. But as you've said, if they've been practiced and they become a unity in their motion, then the signal for the group can follow the lead of the heroes, which is great. And the retreat of the cowards won't affect unless the leadership determines it's time to back out. The group works for the advantage of what the leaders really are going after. It works in a kind of a full setup. It's beautiful.
Thank you, David. Next up is James. James, you need to unmute.
Thank you, Shrikant. Yeah, the thing that appealed to me a lot here is the fact that he uses universals, that Sun Tzu is using universals like the method of handling large masses. He talks about the method of studying moods, and in the Giles translation, he uses the term art. I don't know if that's incorrect, but the idea of a universal concept that governs one's thinking. So you have a way of thinking about masses, handling masses of men that employs things like gongs and drums and banners and flags. But you also have a methodology of self-possession, a methodology of husbanding one's strength, methodology of studying circumstances and so forth. So these universal kind of ways of conceptualizing battle or striving, if you will, are come to the fore. And these universals are juxtaposed to the individual circumstances that demand maybe using drums at this time, or sounding the gong, or or rallying the men around the flag, and so forth.
Thank you, James. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I mean, I just try and think of things in the opposite and what can not occur if you're not able to communicate effectively. So if you think about everything that we've talked about up until now, if you're not able to communicate properly, you cannot necessarily position your forces in order to divide and conquer, which we've talked about. If you can't communicate properly, you can't necessarily know how to the timing as to when to strike. And if you can't communicate properly, then you're probably out of position. So, I mean, these are all things that you kind of think about. What is it? The opposite. What are the consequences of an inability to communicate? Thus, practicing and over and over and over to make sure that this is accessible, like that you're not going to mess this up. This is often, if you watch Navy SEALs, that is the one thing they have as routine is, how before they go out is they definitely know how they're going to signal to one another and how they're going to work together and who's going to be where at what particular moment in time. And they have signals actually more times than not on how to note when one might be in trouble or when one might need to when they might need to reposition.
Thank you, Joe. Next up is Madeline.
Yes, thanks. I'll be brief, or try to. I don't know if anyone here remembers when Merlin Donald came and spoke. He is a neuroscientist and cognitive scientist. He built upon the work of Julian Jaynes. And one of the stages he talked about in life and also in the development of human beings was the mimetic stage, where people are acting and imitating and signaling. And so it's not just that it represents the stage. This is sadly, this is the primal activity to which other things refer, to which football refers, to which parades refer, to which pageantry and spectacle and all sorts of other things refer, would be this activity of combat, warfare, and signaling. You can see it even in groups of monkeys moving through the jungle in the trees.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. Madeline, would you be open to reading the next section?
I'd have to find it. Why doesn't someone else go ahead?
Okay, I'll have James read it first, so it'll give you 2-3 minutes to find it. James, go ahead.
Okay. Let me check. Okay. The whole, tell me if I'm wrong, the whole army may be robbed of its spirit.
Yes.
A commander-in-chief may be robbed of his presence of mind. Now, a soldier's spirit is keenest in the morning. By noonday, it has begun to flag. And in the evening, his mind is bent only on returning to camp. A clever general, therefore, avoids an army when its spirit is keen, but attacks it when it is sluggish and inclined to return. This is the art of studying moods, disciplined and calm, to await the appearance of disorder and hubbub amongst the enemy. This is the art of retaining self-possession, to be near the goal while the enemy is still far from it, to wait at ease while the enemy is toiling and struggling, to be well fed while the enemy is famished. This is the art of husbanding one's strength.
Thank you. Thank you, James.
Actually, the Griffith or the Giles goes all the way through another section. So 6 is also combined.
Yeah, finish it. Yeah.
Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. Sorry. To refrain from intercepting an enemy whose banners are in perfect order. To refrain from attacking an army drawn up in calm and confident array. This is the art of studying circumstances. It is a military axiom not to advance uphill against the enemy, nor to oppose him when he comes downhill. Do not pursue an enemy who simulates flight. Do not attack soldiers whose temper is keen. Do not swallow bait offered by the enemy. Do not interfere with an army that is returning home. When you surround an army, leave an outlet free. Do not press a desperate foe too hard. Such is the art of warfare.
Thank you, James. Madeline, are you ready?
Sure. An entire army can be demoralized and its commander can be made to lose heart. Now, in the morning of the war, the enemy's morale is high. By noon, it begins to flag. By evening, it has drained away. Thus, the expert in using the military avoids the enemy when his morale is high and strikes when his morale has flagged and has drained away. This is the way to manage morale. Use your proper order to await the enemy's disorder. Use your calmness to await his clamor. This is the way to manage the heart and mind. Use your closeness to the battlefield to await the far-off enemy. Use your well-rested troops to await his fatigued. Use your well-fed troops to await his hungry. This is the way to manage strength. Do not intercept an enemy that is perfectly uniform in its array of banners. Do not launch the attack on an enemy that is full and disciplined in its formations. This is the way to manage changing conditions. Therefore, the art of using troops is this: do not attack an enemy who has the high ground. Do not go against an enemy that has his back to a hill. Do not follow an enemy that feigns retreat. Do not attack the enemy's finest. Do not swallow the enemy's bait. Do not obstruct an enemy returning home. In surrounding the enemy, leave him a way out. Do not press an enemy that is cornered. This is the art of using troops.
Thank you. Thank you, Madeline. You're a voice saver. Next, Jason.
Yeah, so we're going to finish this section, and then so you will see here is a lot of so-called axioms. Okay, so I don't know how many of you read the famous novel, Chinese classic novel, The Romance of Three Kingdoms. Okay, that's full of, because talk about during the first century? No, the third century. Okay, the China has three kingdoms fighting each other, a lot of military, and then all these verse, or you want to call axioms, being repeated among the generals, commanders, so it's very familiar if you read the novel. The three armies can be deprived of qi. Okay, the word here used is qi. Okay, so for modern reader, I will keep the qi, and I think should be meaning means morale or spirit. The commander can be deprived of heart mind. The word is xin. Okay, xin means heart, but I think here probably means the psychology, mental state. It is because qi in the morning is acute, qi at noon is inert, and the qi in the evening is returning. He's talking about the military morale, okay, and the situation. Therefore, those who are good at warfare will do the following. So here, Sun Tzu gives a way of rule your enemy's qi, how to rule, you mean the control, okay, enemy's qi, how to rule the enemy's heart, mind, or psychology. how to rule the force, how to rule the changes for things. They avoid the enemy when their qi is acute, but attack them when their qi is inert and returning. This they rule the qi. They are disciplined in order to wait for disorder among the enemy and stay calm in order to wait for disturbance among the enemy. They rule the heart mind. They stay near the target while the enemy is afar. They are at ease when the enemy are exhausted. They are well fed when the enemy is hungry. They rule the forces. They never intercept the enemy when their flanks are orderly. They never attack the enemy when their formation are magnificent. They rule the changes. So here, Sun Tzu talk about you need to rule these four things, the qi, the heart mind, the forces, and the changes. Then here, therefore, the method of military operations are. So here is this, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8, I think the right word should be axioms, right? So people all memorize this one, and during the battlefield, they say, oh, this, right? 7 of them are do not do something, and 1 is different. Okay, not to advance up here when the enemy are at high land, not to oppose the enemy whose back is close to the hill, not to pursue the enemy when not to pursue the enemy who simulate flight, not to attack the soldiers whose morale are high, not to take the bait from the enemy, not to interfere with the enemy when they are returning home, to leave an outlet when you surround the enemy, not to press the desperate enemy too hard. These are the methods of military operation. I'd like to comment on the last 3, not to interfere when the enemy, with the enemy when they are returning home, to leave an outlet when you surround the enemy, not to press the desperate enemy too hard. I'm in another meetup. A lot of people think about that because the moral, okay, you don't want do something, but I'm not reject this argument, but I will think more on a strategic point of view, because when people are going home, they are losing, okay, they are retreating. There's no point to continue. You already get your point, okay? You don't want overkill in today's world. To leave outlet when you surround the enemy, right? So you always leave outlet because you don't want to go to the next step, which is if you don't leave an outlet, the enemy have no choice just to fight to death. So during this point, they become desperate enemy. Then you have to fight to death. They have to fight to death. Then that's hurt you a lot. So I think this last 3 is interesting, and it's not only moral, there's more utilitarian, strategic reason on that. Finally, I would like to mention on the Chinese word on this so-called axioms, okay, 8. So they all, if you pay attention, they all in the 4 characters or with 勿 not, right? 高邻勿相背丘勿逆, so that's 4 words. So that's the language Sun Tzu is using here. Yeah, thank you. And then Aman, please.
All right, I'm going to shoot my voice in one go, and then I will be listening. But I want to say very briefly about this last section, or chapter 5, that does read like a to-do list, to do or to do not list. This is kind of the hand these lessons to your officers, get them out to the soldiers in general, make sure they follow this. And it's probably for a very significant reason. almost all of those axioms deal with a retreating army or a retreating battlefield. If anyone's here is familiar, there's a lieutenant colonel named David Grossman, who is the author of a book called On Killing and then another one on combat. His texts are the preeminent military go-to guide on the psychology, sociology, and history of combat in military units. And one of his findings that was really standing out to me when I read this was that throughout the preponderance of human history, the majority of death on a battlefield occurred when one army or another was in retreat. That is when there's near pack mentality that seems to take over the existing army to chase after and mow down retreating opponents. And if you think about the psychology, it makes a lot of sense. When they are not facing you, they are the least dangerous to you. And after you had a long and stressful day of them trying to kill you, now that they're not, you really want to take it out on them. So it has been human nature to chase after retreating armies, almost like terriers going after rats. So all of these axioms deal with mitigating that behavior, and for a lot of reasons, not least of which is, like Jason said, a cornered army is more dangerous. If you do not leave them a way out, they are a much more dangerous thing to fight. So I find this really interesting that modern military psychology and scholarship validates the subtext of what Sun Tzu was saying thousands of years ago, that this is a terrible idea. And when we first started this reading, I invited people to expand their thinking about the Sun Tzu beyond just mere military tactics, or even, you know, the conversion into business is a very common one, but there is a psychological element to this text as well. And it occurred to me in reading chapter 4 that there's a sociological aspect to this text as well. This was probably proto-sociology, understanding group dynamics and human behavior and how to organize and orchestrate and, let's say, kindly persuade and negatively manipulate it into a course of action that you want it to take. Yeah, I have more to say, but those were the big things that I wanted to get out on the table, and I want to hear everyone else's thoughts, and I'm going to shut up to save my voice quite a bit, but if my hand goes up, it's because I'm really dying to say something, and I'll stick around for as long as I can. Thank you all.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. So folks, now it is open for any comments that you have. I want to tell you the following things. So we're going to have detailed discussion on this. Then I want to tell you about a really historic presentation on military science that we did on this meetup, which is one of the most watched videos on our meetup channel. So I want to tell you it's a really interesting story. And then we will have an open discussion, something connected with the Tao. But now would love to hear your thoughts on this entire, this particular section or this entire chapter. Go ahead and type an exclamation mark or raise your hand in Zoom. We're going to start with Joe.
Yes, as far as this final, section, I do, I agree with Aman exactly with what he said. This is almost, it feels like a to-do list, that what you should, how you should behave in each situation. I will say this too. I agree with, with what Aman had also said about where the carnage can occur by chasing a enemy down that is not necessarily facing you. But there's also this element that and while they're vulnerable, susceptible, they have nothing to lose. So if they're getting mowed down, so they do pose some danger to an individual, not to necessarily the group itself. So that's just something that comes to mind for me, is that, and the other aspect of it is that you want to win a war with as few casualties as possible and maintaining as many resources as possible. So if a force is retreating, there's no need to engage them whatsoever. I'll come back about some of my other comments regarding this chapter in general. I'm gathering some of them in right now. So
sure. Thanks, Joe. Next up is Allison, followed by Quan. Allison.
So this chapter is really making me think that I feel like teachers need to, as schools, we need to re-examine the way that we're taught to deal with school shootings in light of this book, because the signaling one really makes so much sense to me, because schools across the country, we're just taught to lock down. And that's, you're hoping that the police get there in time before too many people die. But the fact is that, when you look at Uvalde, I mean, that's clearly not the most effective way. But if you had correct signaling and you had like a whole process of how you're going to do that, and you're trained in that, then teachers could be alerted as to where someone is. So if there's a shooter in one side of the building and you're alerted as to where they are, at least you could get the kids out of the other side of the building. And definitely lives could be saved. But it's just really, really honestly, I'm going to talk to my boss about this, because I think there are ways that you could incorporate this, really, that could probably save so many lives. So I don't know, I'm really glad I came tonight. And I've got to leave now because I've got to get up early to go teach those kids again tomorrow. All right. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you, Allison. I'm glad that you and all your students are safe. Really appreciate it. And it shows us, the kind of that these are not things that are just applicable during war. This is applicable in human life as such. So thank you. Next up is Quan, followed by Kevin. Quan.
I would like to stress the fact that to leave the enemy and a door to escape is a truly high psychological and philosophical position. However, I would like to bring also a historical example that maybe would bring some paradox to our reflection on warfare and of our general attitude in life. Let's not forget that Sun Tzu, the guy having written that book, was born in 544 BCE. So he was born around the time that Confucius, who was born in 551 BCE, even if historically the two never met. I would like to mention the famous Battle of Hong Shui, which happened in 638 BCE. And in that Battle of Hong Shui, the Duke Xiang of the Principality of Song let his enemy cross the river because he wanted to be a perfect gentleman, rather than to attack them when they were in a vulnerable position while crossing the river. And because of that gentlemanly behavior, he lost that battle. And his principality, which could have become for a certain time the hegemon, meaning the leading principality of the Chinese world of the time, never achieved hegemony. So here we have to think about that sometimes to be a gentleman but not to see the big picture is not necessarily a good thing. And I just want to mention a quote by Mao Zedong about that Duke Xiang of Song, precisely because the Chinese people are very, very aware of their history. Okay, so a leader of the 20th century can quote an own leader 26th century before. And that Mao Zedong say that we are not Duke Xiang of Song and have no use for his idiotic virtue and morality. I'm not saying that Mao is right. I'm saying that it's an occasion to reflect on what is to be truly a gentleman, taking account what you need to do or what is your endeavor. Let's not forget that the Qin Principality, who did not encumber themselves with that kind of consideration, unified China in 221 BCE. So sometimes to behave like a gentleman, is it only for your own personal vanity to be perceived like a gentleman, or to act in favor or in the direction of the benefits of the group that you are leading? So it's a big question. I suppose there are no fixed answer.
Thank you. Thank you, Quan. Next up is Kevin, followed by Joe. Kevin.
Thank you, Shanka. Thank you. First, thank you, Alison. Try to look for some wisdom from the Art of War. It is, I would say, also the first verse, chapter. War is no war. That's how to war. When with war, we need a weapon. So the first place we need to think about that. Why we need a weapon. So, and second one is the monitor system. So what's the motivation doing that? As a school, on how observation take the first place, send the alarm, and how the teachers or students would be help each other, communicate, find the suspicious people earlier stage. Anyway, for me, I put the chat on the key. That's I want to talk about the other thing. Is the key is very important. On the first, they said use the morning, the qi is high. When we got so much energy fighting, then if as a offense, you take that kind of energy, try with utilize. If a defense side, try and avoid let your opponent use qi, the energy to defend you. During evening time, it could be better place. And also another one, this is not from Art of War. In Chinese, I'm going to say is 一鼓作气，再而衰，赛而竭. 3 times. The first time, if you let's say you want to beat someone or some, you're going to defeat hardly. If you cannot, you hate it, but they another opponent, especially in boxer, right? You cannot hit them. The second time you lost, let them free again. Third time, you have no urge, no intensity. Maybe that's the time opponent take advantage. Also, the last one, the last human being, they use the form, like how the your space and your kind, how they use. That's very interesting. Different strategic technique side. Thank you.
Thanks, Kevin. Next up is Joe.
Yeah, I think in summarizing just some thoughts about this entire chapter is that the importance of actually being skilled and adaptable to both direct and indirect attacks. I think that each, and that it allows you to obviously exploit the weaknesses of the enemy if you have multiple different approaches to engaging with the enemy. These are some obvious things, and I think that there are some underlying important things that fall underneath both the ability to attack directly and indirectly. The ability to travel and move quickly. I think that has to factor in when you're looking at how to engage the enemy, like you're positioning yourself against the enemy, really. And I think a lot of this comes back to what we were talking about in the beginning in the first chapter. It's about proper planning and being probabilistic. in how you're approaching warfare. And I think, do you need to attack directly? Do you need to attack indirectly? These are decisions that are made with, the best information possible, but then, it comes down to, these are calculated risks. And even the whole idea of going to war is a calculated risk. And so, and you have the principles that you function by, but you also, in this chapter, just to call out, there's also the rules that help guide some of the decisions that you're making. And I think that's also important, but those rules can be broken, I see as the methods of military operations in certain circumstances, if need be. They're not principles, but so anyway, that's the only difference of it. So thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe. Next up is Anne. Anne, go ahead.
Two questions. Did I hear correctly the notion that the text shifts to address sort of the soldier audience, the implied soldier audience? I'm wondering about the relationship between the common person who's sort of toiling away or laboring quite a bit, and leisure time, if not just sheer literacy, and education. Is there any evidence that most people at that time, most soldiers were literate and such?
And could you go ahead and ask even the second question, and then I will have Amon and Jason answer each and both the questions together. Go ahead.
Thank you. And then in addition, I was wondering about, in my text, it talks about the unified army, and signaling in my text does not equate to the unification concept that underlies the signaling. I wanted somebody to speak a little bit more about that. Does it go back, this unity notion, to well, I don't know what it goes back to.
Thank you. Let's go with Amon, followed by Jason. Amon.
I don't know if I'm going to be able to answer much of the latter question, but as to the former about the literacy rate, there's no hard and fast data to be had there. But as I mentioned before, warfare was transformed in Sun Tzu's time from sort of a ceremonial, stylized, formal chariot battles between elites into giant farmhand conscripted peasant armies fielding thousands, tens of thousands of people on a battlefield. The best estimates I've ever seen suggest the literacy rate could not probably have been higher than about 6 to 8%, perhaps, which actually puts China well ahead of contemporaries in like ancient Rome, where it was something more like 4 to 5% of the general population.
Thank you, Amon. Jason.
Yeah, I'm about to leave, and great. Thank you, Anne, to answer the question. Well, just continue from Amon. Literacy rate, I believe, probably lower than that, because during the 20th century, I think the China's literacy rate probably only 10%. So I cannot believe during that time the literacy rate is high. And about your first question about, does this address to the soldier? Of course, I'm not expert, I'm not scholar, I just a hobbyist, and I read Chinese, I read the archaic Chinese writing style, so I read it and I translate. That's what I'm doing. I think Sun Tzu is not talking to the soldier individual, okay, because they don't care probably, okay. So talking about to the aristocrats, at least to them who can wage the war. That's my understanding. A little bit about my personal feeling about this text. First, I kind of suspect this one was created much later time. That's just my personal feeling, because a lot of words, 5 elements, I just have a feeling. Again, I'm not scholar, but I just read a lot, then I find out. I feel it's probably. So for sure, this book exists, because in the 150 BC, Sima Qian, the great historian, he talked about they have the book called Sun Tzu, that the 13th chapter, but he didn't talk about the content, and probably nobody talk about content. But on the 400 years later, about the 3rd century, the famous prime minister or military guy, Cao Cao, he put a lot of commentary on this 13th chapter. So it must create before that time. Okay, so I personally, I'm not interested on this kind of subject, like is that real or it's not real, but I'm more interested on that's the text, and I see it, and it has been exist for 1,000 years. Let's read it and see what we learn from this. So that's my point, and then others is just my thought. So thank you. And the next, if you like the axiom, the to-do list, okay, I think the next 2 chapters will be very interesting. And I think chapter 9 go to like 31 points. So you probably want to memorize and exercise one by one if you are interested. So go to very detailed. So I thank you, everyone. And the next week could be shorter, and then we will have time to discuss. So see you next week. Thank you.
Next up is going to be James. Thanks, Jason. Yeah.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, that's a very good question, and I think this is related to the fact that the soldiers, of course, they have brains, and of course they have legs, and there's a lot of talking about how they march around and how they, run downhill and things like that. But the fact is that they have eyes and ears, and the eyes and ears are very important capability that soldiers have in warfare. So that's what Sun Tzu is calling attention to, that we have to have a method of using eyes and ears, and that's the flags and banners and drums and gongs, and that's what they're for. And the commander's job is to use these intelligently, so that all the soldiers in the field at the right time can act as a single force.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you, James. All right, folks. So I want to tell you about an amazing meetup, almost a historical level meetup that we did on military science. Okay. So just to give you a little bit of background. Oh, wait a minute. Aman, go ahead.
Sorry, what James was saying absolutely sparked a memory, and I'm going to run soon. But thank you for letting me have a chance to get in one final thought about practice making permanent and the plight of the soldier and the quality of their training. Note, I say, makes permanent, not perfect. There's that old statement that practice makes perfect. It does not. It simply ingrains a habit. And how that habit is executed and performed can be beneficial or detrimental. There's a really famous story in the world of personal safety, self-defense, etc., about a Canadian police officer who was a trainer for the Mounties, who trained disarming an armed assailant. And so for years, he had police in there and showing them this method of taking a gun away, and then he'd hand it back to the person and then take the gun away and repeat and repeat and repeat. So for decades, he ingrained this habit. And one day he actually was held up. And when he was held up, like clockwork, he took the gun away from the person and immediately handed it back to him. just like he had practiced for decades. He's survived. He was shot. He did survive, and they changed their training methods. But this is one of the preeminent stories about how you train determines how you execute, and that you need to account in your training for even the incidental that may not necessarily seem really important. Those signals, those gongs, those bells to communicate with your soldiers are to get trained responses. And the training is paramount. It can't be emphasized enough. So I had to share that story because James sparked my memory, and I have to run and my voice is about gone. But thank you all. I really look forward to seeing you all next week and hopefully speaking like I do on a day-to-day basis.
Thanks, Amon.
Thank you, Amon. It was just
thank you all.
Thank you for being here and sharing all you did in spite of the voice. Okay, I don't know how long my voice is going to hold, but I want to tell you about this meetup because this is really one of the most historic. I can't even believe it took place here, but so I want to just tell you about it. This is based on a work by John Boyd called the OODA loop. He was a fighter pilot who then became the father of F-16 in designing the aircraft, and then came up with a completely new strategy of fighting, which dramatically changed the Pentagon. And Pentagon was dead set against him, but he used his own technique of OODA loop on Pentagon in order to sell them a completely different way of thinking, fighting. And the way he presented all his ideas, he never wrote down anything. He always did it in form of presentation. He would not give anything in writing to people to say, I'll come and present, because that was the best way of breaking the barriers that people would put so that his ideas would not get through. So in long presentations, typically 3 hours to 8 hour presentations, he would go through this entire thing. It was the most popular presentation. Marines are the ones who really took it up, because OODA loop really, they just took to it. Army fought against it, but Marines took to it, and the U.S. Naval Academy took to it. And it was the most popular presentation on the Marine, Quantico base and the U.S. Naval Academy. So he had these co-workers, people whom he worked with for several decades, including Chuck Speeney, who worked under him for like 2-3 decades or so. So after John Boyd died, the head of the U.S. Naval Academy and the people from the Marine base called upon Chuck to start making the presentations instead of John Boyd. And that's what he did. So Chuck Speeney actually is quite a famous guy. He actually appeared on Time magazine. And he came and gave the same presentation he gives to the Marines right here on 52 Living Ideas. So that's what I have put in the chat here. That's the meetup. And what they have done is he actually takes you through. It's a highly interactive presentation. It's the same slides that he uses at the U.S. Naval Academy still. And, it's typically like 3 to 5 hours there. I think we did about 3 hours. And we had a number of people who were really knowledgeable about the military show up. It is one of the most popular videos on 52 Living Ideas. It circulates all the time on different military forums. It's the best introduction to John Boyd's ideas, because they were meant to be introduced in form of a presentation. And Chuck is an amazing presenter. It's a highly interactive presentation, so don't miss that. So that's what it is. If anybody has any kind of questions about, quick questions about this, I'm happy to answer it. Otherwise, I want to go. I don't know how long I can stay, but I want to raise a topic. Probably it's not a good idea to go into any topic because my voice is going to go out. But next time I'll continue on this topic. I've been looking at the Tao. I mean, we are doing a meetup on Bhakti Yoga from Bhagavad Gita this Friday. We did, Yogeshwar was here and he did a fantastic presentations. His presentations on Bhakti Yoga are just really, way up there. And those are all linked to in this meetup on, Joe, if you could do me a favor and put the link for the Friday meetup in the chat. And the context, I want to give you the context here. The idea of the unmanifest and manifest, and how do you go between them, is a very deep idea. And Tao has its way of, the only thing I know is Tao Te Ching. So Tao Te Ching has a way of dealing with this question. And the Bhagavad Gita has another way of dealing with the questions. There are lots of similarities, but there are some differences. And it's really, really fascinating topic. So if you are interested in, this topic, I would recommend coming for the Friday meetup on Bhagavad Gita. I also recommend, this is going to be chapter 12 of Bhagavad Gita. But you can read the chapter, which is very quick, which will probably take you maybe less than 7 minutes, 8 minutes of hearing, or 10, 15 minutes of reading. But, we have got 4 hours of meetup where Yogeshwar spends probably an hour during that time explaining each verses. So that would be a good thing. And I want to start off with that as a base to discuss Bhakti Yoga. And then maybe next time we'll talk about how, Tao Te Ching deals with the manifest and the unmanifest, and how does it compare with Gita. Thanks, Joe. He has put the link in for the Friday meetup. So thank you very much, everybody. I really appreciate what Jason and Amon are doing. I really appreciate all the comments. It's just a amazing group here. So thank you so much. And thank you, Joe, for always filling in whenever needed. Thank you. All right. Take care, everybody.
Thanks, Shrikant.
Bye. Bye.